Ambient creatures are everywhere in Tyria, from cows to rabbits to dragonflies to chickens. You can find a variety of different little creatures in most corners of the world. In this video, I want to go over my top 10 favorite ambient creatures across all of Guild Wars 2. Starting off with number 10 are snakes. Snakes are a pretty common animal that you can find throughout the world, but in Tyria, they can only be found in the desert highlands. Specifically, they can only be found in the Auburn Hills region of the desert highlands, which is the region near the ogre craw that can be found in the northern highlands. And well, there isn't too much to say about them. They're snakes and they are cool. They slither around and stuff, but I find it super interesting that they can only be found in the desert highlands. I think there are other places in the world that could house snakes, and I hope to see more snakes in the future. Another part about snakes that makes them special to me is how I wanted there to be snakes in Guild Wars 2. With snakes only being found in the desert highlands, that means they were added in the Path of Fire expansion in 2017. There were 5 years of Guild Wars 2 with no snakes out in the open world, and I remember thinking about how there was a lack of ambient snakes in the world and that I wish they would be added to the game. And my wish came true in 2017. There was actually a mini version of a snake that existed in the Guild Wars 2 beta, but never made it to the launch of the game, and it seems like they used the same model from that mini to add snakes to the open world. In the number 9 spot are rats. Now I have a lot to say about rats in Guild Wars 2. First of all, there are actually a few different types of ambient rats in the game. You have the generic rats that you can find all throughout the world, like in Ascalon, Cryota, Cantha, and so on. Rats are probably one of the most common ambient creatures in the entire game, and you can really find them in a lot of locations. But you can also find ghostly rats in the Aquavod Wilds. They are surrounding the area at the entrance to the Vaudhurt's Crypt in the Quarry Forelands, and you can find irradiated rats in the Anthill and Metrica province, which play a part of the task to help the Chaos crew in the area. But beyond the variety of different types of rats that exist and how prevalent they are, rats actually play an important part in the gameplay of Guild Wars 2. You see, there are 2 achievement categories called Slayer and Weapon Master, where the Slayer achievements have you kill 1,000 different creatures of specific species, like killing 1,000 minotaurs or centaurs, where one of the categories is to kill 1,000 indiscriminate creatures, like rats. And then the Weapon Master category has you killing 5,000 enemies, but with a specific weapon, like a greatsword or longbow. But there are achievements to kill 5,000 enemies with offhand weapons, like a shield, which are pretty slow to complete compared to the achievements for main hand weapons. So what a lot of people like to do is to focus on indiscriminate creatures in order to complete the Weapon Master achievements, because you only have to hit an ambient creature once to kill it and to get a point towards the achievement. Now there are a few different locations that people like to do this at, but one of the most popular, if not the most popular, is by killing rats. In chapter 6 of the personal story, members of the Vigil have a mission called Forearmed is Forewarned that takes the player into the sewers underneath the Vanilla Lion's Arch, and in the sewers are a never-ending stream of rats, where the rats spawn further into the sewer and just run through it towards the entrance. This is an incredible touch to the area that really helps with the vibes of the mission, but is also incredibly useful for achievement hunters, because about 1 rat spawns every second and they will never stop spawning. So a lot of players like to come to this mission and just farm the rats over and over for whatever Weapon Master achievement they want to complete. And the number 8 spot is the Unsuspicious Rabbit. This is a very unique ambient creature that you can find in a relatively random spot of the world. Just like rats, there are a ton of rabbits of different colors in the game all across the world, including a special type of rabbit that can only be found during a task in Snowdin Drifts. But this rabbit can be found in Mount Maelstrom and is kinda just hanging out here. In Merkvale, in the southwestern corner of the map, you can find a ton of Risen wandering around in this area that you can kill as part of a task. But east of the Merkvale waypoint, sitting on the bridge that goes over the canyon, you can find this Unsuspicious Rabbit, sitting here, watching the Risen. Now this is likely a reference to something, or it was just a board dev that threw this in. There are some discussions about this rabbit, and nobody really knows why it exists. Nothing comes to mind for me, and I tried to do some digging and couldn't really find any pieces of media that involve a rabbit on a bridge looking at undead creatures, which leads me to believe that this is just a random mob that a dev put into the game for fun. In the number 7 spot is the Desert Fox. Now this one doesn't really have a story connected to it, and I just love how they look. They are adorable. You can find these foxes across the Crystal Desert and Kurna, in the Crystal Oasis, Desert Highlands, Elon Riverlands, Domain of Kurna, and Jahai Bluffs. They are adorable and just run around the world. You can actually tame one of these in the Jahai Bluffs as a part of upgrading Sun's Refuge. You can find a desert fox in Vinta Pass and ease its distress by feeding it food, which once you do, the fox will appear in Sun's Refuge, allowing you to play with it. You can pet it, give it commands, play fetch, and feed it more food. You can also unlock a mini desert fox by doing this, where upon easing the distress of the desert fox in Jahai Bluffs, you unlock a mini version of it that can run around with you in the world. Wish the mini looks just like the ambient creature and is an absolutely adorable companion to have run around with you. In the number 6 spot are the Fanged Deer. Now there are quite a few deer you can find in the game, which all look adorable. Deer are one of my favorite animals in real life, and I love them in Guild Wars 2 as well. But with the Ender Dragons expansion, there's a special type of deer that you can find in Saitung province. Around Haiju Lagoon and the Xingje Monastery, you can find these deer just hanging out on the hills and around the bamboo located here. And they look pretty cool. I remember stumbling upon them when Ender Dragons first came out and just being impressed by their models. But there is something that is super interesting about them. If you have ever been around Ender Dragons maps, you may be confused by what I said earlier with them being located around Haiju Lagoon and the Xingje Monastery, because you might remember seeing Fanged Deer elsewhere in Saitung province, like around the training grounds, as well as in other Ender Dragons maps. And you are right, but the deer found around those areas are neutral mobs that don't attack on sight but will fight you should you attack them, whereas the deer found in the 2 areas I mentioned are ambient, but they are only sometimes ambient. You can find both neutral and ambient Fanged Deer here, and I'm not entirely sure why this is the case. My leading suspicion is that Fanged Deer are sometimes bugged, and an ambient version of the mob will occasionally spawn, but nevertheless, I find this super interesting, and Fanged Deer are pretty cool, and are based on a pretty cool animal. In the number 5 spot are vultures. This is another ambient creature that doesn't really have a story connected to it, and is just an animal that I find pretty cool. You can find vultures all across the Crystal Desert in Kurna, as well as in Dragon's End in Cantha, as well as in the Red Desert Borderlands. I really like how their model looks, and with them being vultures, you can find them in a lot of dry and arid areas. Vultures in general are birds of prey that eat the decaying flesh of dead animals, which is kinda gross, but also kinda cool at the same time. And the existence of vultures, I would say, is pretty important for fleshing out certain fantasy worlds. If you want a kind of dark and deserty vibe where there are dead animals and the cycle of life taking place, vultures are a great addition to those worlds, and I think they are pretty cool in Guild Wars 2. In the number 4 spot are Choya Pups. This is kind of a funny one for me because I didn't really think about the fact that these are ambient creatures. Choyas are a fan favorite creature that were introduced in the Path of Fire expansion and are basically plant quaggins, where we can find Choya across the Crystal Desert in Alona and are mostly just random bad enemies that you fight. But you can find Choya Pups in a few different areas, which are basically just smaller Choya. I personally find Choya pretty cute, and baby Choya are cute as well. You can also find Choya Pups that are peaceful to you, where in the Desert Highlands, there is Prickle Patch Hollow. This location is a task area where the Choya around here are mostly friendly towards you, and you are helping them out. And there are a bunch of different Choya in this area, including Choya Pups, which are pretty cute here as well. And this is just another example of how certain mobs can be both ambient creatures and not at the same time. Where looking back on the Fanged Deer we were talking about earlier, I think it might be bugged, but these Choya Pups are a pretty good example of how they are purposely peaceful or ambient, depending on where they are located. In the number 3 spot are Fawns. Back to when we talked about Fanged Deer yet again, I mentioned that deer are one of my favorite animals, and like I said, there are quite a few deer in Guild Wars 2, but for the longest time, there were never baby deer out in the open world. I mentioned at the start of this video that there was a mini version of the snake that existed, but it only existed during the beta of Guild Wars 2 and never made it to the launch game, where that model was reused to add an ambient creature in the world, and we see a similar thing going on here with Fawns, where there is a mini Fawn that exists in the game that you can get. You used to get them from a special Winter's Day Minis 3-pack gem store item, but now you get it via a guaranteed wardrobe unlock or buy Black Lion miniature claim tickets, and the Fawn is adorable. But we see this Fawn model was reused and put out in the open world, and it was actually added pretty recently with the Secrets of the Obscure expansion, where this is, at the time of making this video, one of the newest ambient creatures in the game, where you can go to Skywatch Archipelago and find Fawns in a few different areas around the map, and I just love them so much. They are adorable, but I really hope we get to see more Fawns in the game. It's cool that they are in Skywatch Archipelago, but I would love to see them in future maps as well. Alongside that, I think it would be cool if Fawns were added to older areas of Tyria as well, where they can hang out around deer in the various areas of the world we can find deer. I think that would be fun, and I would just love to see more Fawns around the world, like I said. In the number 2 spot is a 3-for-1, and it is actually a reference to the Lion King. With the Path of Fire expansion, we got 5 brand new maps. The first map is Crystal Oasis, and pretty close to Amnoon, basically the main hub of the expansion, we can find 3 different animals walking around near some trees: a meerkat, a warthog, and a lion cub. And like I said, this is a reference to the Lion King, where these three animals represent Simba, Timon, and Pumbaa from the movie, which the Lion King was a pretty big part of my childhood, and I love to see a reference to it in Guild Wars 2. This is probably one of the most popular references in the entire game, where a lot of people like to point it out when they find it. But technically, none of these three animals are ambient creatures. They are peaceful towards players, which prevents players from killing them, which I would say is a good thing, but we can find these animals elsewhere in the world. But another technicality here, only one of them is an ambient creature. The lion cub is actually unique to this Easter egg. There are no other lion cubs in the game. We can find sand lions around the Crystal Desert and other areas though. And you can get a lion cub mini that used to be in the gym store, but is now only attainable from the guaranteed wardrobe unlock, as well as Black Lion miniature claim tickets. Warthogs are not ambient creatures and are mobs that can be found all throughout the world, especially in Ascalon, the Maguma Wastes, and the Crystal Desert. And then the meerkat, where there actually isn't a meerkat in Guild Wars 2 besides the one we find here in the Crystal Oasis, but it shares a model with the skittish prairie dog, which is an ambient creature that you can find in the Sand-Swept Isles. But all in all, I love these three animals, and this is a great reference. But now, for the number one spot, for my favorite ambient creature in all of Guild Wars 2, and it's going to go to the Tanuki. The Tanuki are absolutely adorable creatures that you can find across Ender Dragon's maps. The Tanuki are actually real animals, sometimes referred to as Japanese raccoon dogs, which are a species commonly found in Japan, where actually they play a pretty big part in Japanese folklore, and I'll share some links down in the description if you want to read more. But you can find Tanuki in multiple Ender Dragons maps, and they are always so fun to run across because of how adorable they are. There isn't too much to say about them, but I just have a special spot in my heart for them. There is one really interesting thing going on with them where in Echovold Wilds, you can find a bunch of peaceful Tanuki near the Tangled Altar, where these Tanuki run around this area, and when you approach them, they vanish in a surge of light and appear later in a surge of light as well. I think this may be connected to the nearby event where you help put some spirits to rest, but I don't think anybody knows for sure why this is happening. Additionally, you can get a mini Tanuki in Arborstone from one of the fishing merchants, where you unlock the ability to buy this after maxing out your fishing mastery, and can buy this for karma and 50 flawless fish fillets. And it's just like any other mini where it will follow you around the world and look adorable while doing it. And just all in all, I think the Tanuki are absolutely adorable and fantastic ambient creatures to have in Guild Wars 2. And that's my list. I hope you enjoyed. I was inspired to make this list from a comment on my top 10 rivers in Guild Wars 2 video, so if you have any requests for top 10 lists in the future, go ahead and leave a comment down below and I'll see about getting around to it. I hope you all are taking good care of yourselves. Have a good one, everyone.